Well, today we're going to talk about acceleration. I could call it accelerating convergence or converging acceleration or any number of combinations. But this week, again, every week I know I say this, there was a lot that happened. And a lot that I think relates to the prophetic timeline that we're looking at, the soon return of the Lord, a period of time in which there will be a lot of turmoil on the planet, as if there isn't already. A lot of time where there will be a time where there will be great spiritual warfare. And I believe persecution of the church is coming, and I think it's just coming worldwide, and I think that people in the West need to prepare for that. I can't begin to scratch the surface of the things that I have this week, so I've picked out a few things that I think are important. But I always like to look at what secular people say that line up with Scripture. And so here is a quote. This was from the World Government Summit that took place in Dubai a couple weeks ago, about a week and a half ago. And here is Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla. And here's what he has to say.
Particularly like things seem to be accelerating to something.
Things seem to be accelerating. He's very deep. And he does know something about acceleration, by the way. The new Tesla was tested this week, and it accelerated 0 to 60 in 2.28 seconds. The fastest production car for mass production that they've ever tested. By about a half a second over some $110,000 Porsche or one of those limited production cars. But so not only is it accelerating, it's converging at a very increasingly rapid rate. And as I've said, as we get closer to that point, the second coming of Christ, all of these things will accelerate, they will converge. And the convergence will, in my view, be almost like a vortex, like the center of a tornado as it comes spinning through. It'll be going so fast. It'll be like, a flood in California. This is the Oroville Dam. I did not know this was the highest. I've been to Hoover Dam. This dam is about 200 feet higher than Hoover Dam, if you've ever been there and seen that monstrosity. And so it appears they have things under control, but from friends in California, they have 25 to 30, they have 250 to 300 feet in parts of the Sierra of snow. And so that means there's 25 to 30 inches of rain locked up there that will melt, that will all melt. Not every last bit of it will melt this summer. And it has to go somewhere. And it will go to lakes like Oroville and others that have dams that are already under great stress. Although it will be a great year, travel tip, if you want to go to Yosemite and see spectacular waterfalls, this will be the year. My understanding is they're already off the charts. I don't want to talk too much about the shack, but I do want to mention this, that it's coming out this week. I wouldn't bother going seeing it unless you're going to go to help instruct a friend as to what's wrong with it. The book was horrible. I don't care if people say that the book was just fiction. The book was not theologically correct. And it's interesting, the conversations that I've had with some people about, oh, I love The Shack. Well, don't worry about it, John. It's just fiction. Well, what did you like about it? Oh, it taught me so much about the character and nature of God. Now, listen, fiction is very manipulative, very easy to be misled by. Here is a study guide put out by Cru, what the new term for Campus Crusade, 9 discussion questions for you. So you can go to the movie, get the book, and have a Bible study group meet to discuss The Shack. And so, for example, look at number 7. Did the message of The Shack change your perspective on events in your life and the whys you may ask God about around your own circumstance? Number 9, after seeing The Shack, do you have a new perspective of God, even when he may seem invisible? Did The Shack build your faith? Listen, when something teaches false nature of God, it's heresy. And William Paul Young is a New Age heretic. I don't use the H word very often, but there's a great book out there, I think I mentioned it last week, called Burning Down the Shack by Paul DeYoung, who is actually in a Bible study group with William Paul Young, the author of The Shack, and he knows where this came from, and he knows what he's believing. So keep that in mind and be careful. Now here's another one. I don't enjoy. I'm not trying to tear people down. I'm trying to warn people. Okay, but we all need to make corrections in our life at times. I mean, look, none of us is perfect. But this is a very concerning thing. This is from the Gaither's Homecoming magazine in October of last year. It's an article by Gloria Gaither about Richard Rohr, An Invitation to the Divine Dance. Now, he wrote a book with Mike Morrell called The Divine Dance, The Trinity and Your Transformation. Richard Rohr is he's a Catholic monk. He does not believe in the true gospel. And why Gloria Gaither is enamored with him, I have no idea. You know, there are people within the Gaither group that hold to very unbiblical views. One I've mentioned in the past is Cynthia Clawson. Great singer, but I have pictures of her going to a gay-affirming church and supporting a gay-affirming church in Arkansas as to how wonderful it is that they recognize homosexual marriage. I did that 10 years ago in the class I was teaching at another church. Richard Rohr does not teach a biblical view of the Trinity. He is New Age. He is very close to a guy named Ken Wilber, who is a New Age, a straight New Age, not even marginally call himself to be a Christian. And both of those guys have been very influential in the emerging church, or the emergent church, influencing guys like McLaren and particularly Rob Bell, who said the first thing you should do, you know, when you come to his church or become a Christian is go read Ken Wilber's book. It'll blow your mind. It'll ruin your mind biblically. So that's where we are. So let's look at the world and some of the world situations. And I know we have a business meeting, so we need to get this wrapped up today. This is just an interesting chart to kind of show you where things are. This is the percentage of the current world GDP by each of these major countries. So, for example, you see the United States has 24%. The next largest is China at 14%. Japan at about 6%. And over there to the left, you can see Russia at 1.8%. And they are behind Italy at 2.46%, France and Germany. So we know Russia does a very good job at making itself a bigger power than it is in some respects. It has a lot of military power. It probably is the second in the world, particularly in nuclear weapons and some other things. But it's not a huge economic power. So you need to keep that in mind. And, well, maybe I'll have some more comments about that later. Okay. This is something I saw on Pajamas Media the other day. Ohio LGBT group announces plans to target churches for homosexual weddings. Now, the reason for that is that there's currently pending, and I believe this is still pending, a bill in the Ohio House of Representatives, House Bill number 286, which would allow ministers to choose who they perform weddings for based on their religious beliefs. So in other words, if you're a minister and you're performing weddings, you can perform the weddings and not be subject to a lawsuit if you don't perform a same-sex marriage, if that is against your religious beliefs. It also has a provision in there for religious assemblies to also be exempted for not renting out their facilities to same-sex couples if that is against their religious beliefs. It will make you immune from a civil lawsuit. And so what the different groups are, so for example, here, paragraph 2, no religious society is required to allow any building or property of the religious society to be used to host a marriage ceremony for a marriage that does not conform to the religious society's sincerely held religious beliefs. But what and the ACLU is very upset with this bill. It says, we oppose the bill because religious leaders' right to decline to perform weddings is already protected by the First Amendment. Watch what will happen if this bill doesn't pass and people refuse. And who will be on the other side helping with the lawsuit? The lying American Civil Liberties Union. They're lying. I don't think they really believe this. Occasionally they get it right. They also said this: Ohio legislators should be working on providing protections to their LGBT constituents who can be fired from their jobs, kicked out of their homes, and denied public services instead of focusing on further discrimination. Okay, so the ACLU is the be-all and end-all of the received wisdom on this particular topic. And they call, say, President Trump arrogant. Okay, you need to listen to us. You need to focus on something else and do something else. But this is what happens. This is the lady. She's a florist. I think she's out in Washington. She's losing her business. She's liable for millions of dollars in damages because she refused to make up a floral arrangements, custom floral arrangements for her gay friend, who then turned around and sued her. And she referred him to many other people in town. But they don't care. They want to destroy you. That's the point, and keep that in mind. Now, early this week, there was this transgender thing. It bothers me. It is a level of, what did I use? I used a term in a post this week. I think that lunacy on this issue is just a rest stop on the road to total insanity. So this week, what happened was President Trump and Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced that they were going to withdraw the guidance letter that had been issued near the end of the Obama administration, telling schools all across the country how they needed to configure their bathrooms or deal with their bathrooms and transgender students. It was just guidance, but the implication was if you don't do it this way, you violate Title IX. Now, Title IX has always prevented sex discrimination. It came out, I remember doing a debate in speech class in college about the new Title IX that came out. We had a debate about, the girls on the women on the other side were arguing that, we should have separate and equal facilities. And I said, well, it doesn't seem separate but equal because the women's field hockey team gets the whole field and the men's cross-country team has to run around the outside. That just doesn't seem fair to me. And I said one of the solutions was let's just have one team. And then the best man or woman that you can get on the team wins. Now, you know that what would happen in most cases. I mean, I don't think, well, if any woman was good enough to play in the NBA, they would be in the NBA. I mean, because those guys want to make money and it would be a huge marketing thing. So, but the point of Title IX was it was based on sex, which is your biological position. You're male or you're female. What the Obama administration did was they tried to take sex and reinterpret it to mean transgender, your choice of gender or sex. And the court down in Texas issued a nationwide injunction and said, no, that's not what the statute says. The Obama administration went outside the law. If you don't like the law, change the law, but you can't do it through an executive order. And the Obama administration also sued the state of North Carolina over their bathroom bill. And my understanding is that lawsuit is going to be withdrawn. So there was a discussion with Chris Cuomo. He's a son of the former governor of New York, Mario Cuomo, and he's an anchor, one of the new anchors at CNN. And on his Twitter feed, somebody said this, PP, purported pundit. What do you tell, Chris Cuomo, what do you tell a 12-year-old girl who doesn't want to see a penis in the locker room? Well, Chris Cuomo, responded, as you might expect a man to left to do this. I wonder if she is the problem or her overprotective and intolerant dad. Teach tolerance. In other words, let your 12-year-old kid take it. And then he proceeded for a day on Twitter to defend himself. I love my kids. I love my daughters. No, you don't. This is a level of insanity that I don't think I've ever seen in public life before. The discussion continued. Somebody put their 2 cents in. How can my daughter verify a legit trans female pervert who wants to watch women undress? Asked to see papers? Ridiculous. And I agree. And the discussion was just, reading the threads on these discussions now is, we're more divided than ever. And there are a group of people out there who have no concept of morality. But they portray themselves as, we're the most moral, we care more. But I don't know who they care about. I mean, so listen, so the whole thing is crazy. So Trump dropped the protection for transgender use. He revoked that letter. That's all he did, was he revoked that letter. And do you see the bottom of this headline from the Washington Post? States, localities to decide students' restroom rights. What that means is Trump didn't stop any school anywhere from doing everything. He just said that it doesn't have to be a one-size-fits-all for the whole country. Now, I'm going to play a couple of clips, and I want you to see the common theme in both of these clips, one from NBC National, one from NBC Local. Here's first clip.
It's a big reversal, slowing the push for transgender rights that zoomed ahead under President Obama. The federal government today took back a directive issued just last May that told public schools to let children use bathrooms that match their gender identity.
Why don't you stand?
Today's move is a blow to Mimi LeMay of suburban Boston, who has a transgender child.
As a vulnerable child, he deserves to go to school every day and feel safe and be affirmed as who he is.
The government now says a federal law called Title IX that bans sex discrimination in public schools does not apply to transgender children because gender identity isn't the same as sex. It's a victory for a dozen states that sued to block the Obama order.
You don't want to be intermingling the sexes, young boys and young girls, on school trips, school locker rooms, school showers. That's clearly a violation of privacy.
Because of the Justice Department's legal U-turn today, the government will probably also drop its challenge to North Carolina's bathroom law that cost the state millions in lost business. When that lawsuit was filed, Obama's Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, had an emotional message for the transgender community.
We see you. We stand with you, and we will do everything we can to protect you going forward.
Today's move could also undercut the case of a Virginia transgender student, Gavin Grimm, coming to the Supreme Court next month. Both cases were based in part on the Obama administration's reading of Title IX. Back in Boston, Mimi LeMay says she's worried.
We can't give equal access to students in schools, then what's going to happen to all the public access laws that are out there?
And to Loretta Lynch, I would say, we saw you, we heard you, we disagreed with you, and we've taken away your legacy. Here is NBC, this is local NBC News, because this right here, guidance on transgender bathroom use may change. There's currently pending an ordinance that will be heard on Tuesday at Columbus City Council, and they will prevent what they call conversion therapy, where you would advise somebody that came to you, a 4-year-old child comes to you, clearly a boy, saying, I think I'm a girl. You are not allowed to do any therapy in Columbus that would cause them to go back to their gender identity matching their biological sex. 4 years old. Now, I don't know what would happen. I suppose if a heterosexual came to you and said they wanted to change to be a male, a male came and said, I want to stay a male, but I don't know. Can you see how confusing it is? Because it's insane. It's absolutely insane. So here's the local Channel 4 calling Marshall report on the Columbus Ordinance. And I'm missing my, oh, hang on a second here. I got my slides out of order. Here we go.
Columbus City Council proposing a motion that would follow suit with cities like Toledo and Cincinnati and ban health professionals from performing conversion therapy on minors.
Some say the controversial therapy does more harm than good. City Council unlikely to vote on the issue until next month.
Some in attendance shedding tears. Nearly all in attendance applauded her back to her seat.
This is the boy.
City Council President Zach Klein among those admiring Evelyn.
Thank you for standing up and being yourself. And we appreciate you for being yourself. And that was amazing.
Evelyn's family has been supportive since she came out to them in 8th grade. Her mother tells me they embrace that part of her, and Evelyn wants other families to do the same.
Okay, do you see the common theme? The emotional to the child. It's just a child. We don't want to hurt the child's feelings and all of that. We remember this from just a month ago, the National Geographic cover. By the way, they only sent the cover on the left to people's homes. They didn't put it in the newsstands because they thought that the shock of the one on the left, it's okay if you get it in the mailbox, but you don't want to see it on a newsstand at 7-Eleven. And they were also criticized on the picture on the right for not having enough different gender identities in the picture. Because there's another one, and so this is what National Geographic said. We realized several years ago that beliefs about gender, why would they do this? Because, National Geographic has always been pretty places, evolution, archaeology, great photography, that type of thing. We realized several years ago, they said that beliefs about gender were shifting rapidly and radically. For almost 130 years, National Geographic has explored the world through science, exploration, and storytelling. Gender permeates every part of what it means to be human, and reporting on the changing understandings of a biological and social concept is, put simply, what we do. It's what they do now. It's not what they've done in the past. Our coverage doesn't come with a political or partisan agenda. We created the gender issue, as we do every issue, with the intent to research, understand, and explain. But what they didn't reference was this is Paul McHugh, who used to be at Johns Hopkins, and Lawrence Mayer's review of the literature on sexuality and gender. It's not a scientific research paper. It's a review of scientific research papers. And McHugh was at Johns Hopkins, where they did the first transgender sex reassignment surgery. And they stopped doing them 20 years ago. Why? Because they found out that the people that had sex reassignment surgery were over 20 times more likely to commit suicide after the surgery than they were before. In other words, it didn't work. That's sort of what science determines, right? Biological science. So they have an American College of Pediatrics, which is a conservative-oriented pediatrics thing. And they said here, rates of suicide are nearly 20 times greater among adults who use cross-sex hormones and undergo sex reassignment surgery, even in Sweden, more about Sweden in a minute, which is among the most LGBTQ-affirming countries. Number 8, conditioning children into believing a lifetime of chemical and surgical impersonation of the opposite sex is normal and helpful is child abuse. Praise the Lord for people with courage to stand up and take a stand that makes sense. Remember what the Bible says. God created them male and female. When Jesus was asked the question, he referenced creation in male and female. He didn't go into cisgender, transgender, questioning, whatever all of these non-binary, what all these other terms they use today. This from the Huffington Post by a professor emeritus at Chicago Theological Seminary said this. This is when she was asked about the question. And by the way, when Paul McHugh comes out, he's now derided in the press. What's the meme that comes out with him? Oh, he's the favorite of the radical right wing that don't care about transgender kids. It's a lie. It's propaganda. I don't know how else to describe it. So this professor at the Huffington Post said this: "Where is my justice struggle located today as a Christian pastor and theologian? One crucial place is in the bathroom. Bathrooms are a specific place where those whom society has decided are the least of these, that is, people who are not accorded equal dignity and worth, are being persecuted." She doesn't care about little girls. It's just absolutely stunning. And now in one of the great scripture twistings of all times, and you know what Jesus said about the least of these, don't you? He was one of them. "Whatever you did to the least of my brothers and sisters, you did it to me." But the Trump administration, far from protecting the least of these, actively tries to single them out for persecution. Theirs is a divide and conquer mentality. Their current target is transgender students. Get it? Vulnerable kids. Now listen, depending on your view of creation timing, it's certainly true that the human race has been around for 6,000 years, to maybe millions of years if you adopt some other view. In the history of humankind, this kind of nonsense has not been accepted until just recently. Who is doing the divide and conquer? This is what happens with the left. You always have to keep in mind, first of all, assume they're probably not telling the truth. Second, what they say probably won't make much sense to you if you have common sense. And third, it's all based on feelings. And fourth, they will project on you what they're doing. So if they call you a hater, they're the hater. If they call you a divider and conqueror, they're the ones who are dividing and conquering. So always keep, those are sort of 4 quick rules on interpreting what you read from people on the left. Now I'm going to play this. This is a few-minute clip from Tucker Carlson the other night, and I want you to see, I may fast forward through it a little bit, but he was interviewing a Democratic Central Committee party spokesman on what Trump did. So here we go.
Well, last May, the Obama administration announced a new rule requiring every public school in the country to let transgender students use whichever bathroom or locker room match their preferred gender identity. Well, yesterday, the Trump administration retracted that rule, saying that bathroom policies like these are state issues and shouldn't be set by the decrees of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Zach Pekanis is the senior advisor to the DNC and helms their Trump war room. This morning on Twitter, he called President Trump a monster for reverting to the policy in place just 1 year ago. He joins us now. Zach, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So, I mean, I think there are 2 sides to every debate, including this one. What I was so struck by was your tweet where you, and I'm reading it now, "I woke up feeling so sick to my stomach about the Trump White House's attacks on vulnerable LGBT kids. These people are monsters." Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, was Obama attacking vulnerable LGBT kids a year ago before putting this policy into place? He spent 7 years as president and didn't do this. Was he a monster attacking LGBT kids during that time?
Well, I mean, what we know is that he put these protections in place. And let's be clear about what we're actually talking about. This is guidance that was provided to schools that schools wanted and asked for. And it's for a very specific reason. They wanted to create a safe environment for all the kids in their school, and they wanted to avoid Title IX lawsuits. I mean, that's what's so mind-boggling about what the Trump administration did today. He took away practical guidance to school administrators and principals who were looking to create this safe environment and were looking to not get sued for Title IX violations.
I mean, those guidelines.
Okay, like Caroline Glick, Tucker Carlson does this. When somebody says something really stupid, you can see, sort of Tucker Carlson, he gets his radar lock, and you can kind of see him, load up and get ready to fire. Okay.
Still exist on the internet, presumably, and they could look them up. It's not like they're disappearing from the English language. And so I still am waiting for the answer to my question, though. It took the Obama people 7 years to do this, and that's fine with me, but I'm not the one calling people monsters for pulling them back. So, are you giving President Obama a pass for not acting on this sooner?
I'm giving President Obama extraordinary praise for taking decisive action to protect these vulnerable kids, and And I am saying that Donald Trump is not only a monster, but he's a coward. We're talking about somebody who is so emasculated by Vladimir Putin that he has to.
All right, I'm going to have to stop you there because now we're getting off in a crazy world.
That he has to come back and pick on vulnerable kids.
Okay.
These kids are the most vulnerable children in the country.
Slow down, Zach. Let's get to the core of the issue. Do you mind? Look, I get that I'm never going to get you to say that Obama should have done it. That's fine. Let's move from the politics to the science, because this policy has implications that go far beyond bathrooms and locker rooms. The core question is what constitutes male and female. And the implication of these guidelines that Obama put in place is that a man is someone who says he's a man, and a woman is someone who says she's a woman. You get to decide your gender. There's no biological anchor to sex anymore. It's all determined by the individual. So my obvious question for you is, how do I know if a person's male or female? Is there some other absolute standard that people have to meet to be male or female, other than what they say?
One's gender identity is enough to show what gender they are. And so if you're confused about that, I mean, I leave that, to your level of enlightenment and
No, it's not about enlightenment. It's not about moral status. This is a real question because there are all kinds of institutions in American life that function on a sex-segregated basis. Women's college, sports, both professional and amateur, prisons. And so you're telling me that I can play on a women's sports team when I say I'm a woman.
What we are saying is that in this guidance with public schools, which and the vulnerable kids that are there, that there are specific guidelines that these teachers and these supervisors and these principals asked for in how to create safe.
Okay, but now you're going back to the first question. You just said a second ago that
that is what we're talking about.
No, let me take you back 3 sentences. When you said gender identity is determined by the person who possesses it. That's almost exactly what you said.
Correct.
And I'm saying there are massive implications of this that everyone is either too dumb or too embarrassed to explore, but let's do so now. If your sex is what you say it is, then what prevents me from playing on a women's field hockey team? What prevents me from getting convicted of a felony and demanding to go to a women's prison? And it's a real question.
It's not a real question.
Why is it not a real question?
It's not a real question because it is pretty absurd, and there are no other examples.
Because why?
Because there are no examples of this. What
do you mean?
I'm sorry, but there are no examples. This is the same argument about saying that this will allow sexual predators to go into women.
I'm not making that argument.
Yes, but you are making that argument.
Okay, what I'm saying is, I just want to know what the standards are. I'm not actually making any claims. I'm merely asking a question, and I want you to answer.
Yes, the standards are
Is there a scientific standard? Because when you deal with questions of biology, that is a species of science. So what's the scientific standard? I'm a scientist. I want to know if you're a man or a woman. How do I find out?
Look, these are discussions that I encourage you to have with someone who is transgender, and they can come and talk to you about.
I don't need that to speak to a I can speak to you because you think about this stuff for a living. So it's a very simple question.
Yes.
I want to know if you're a man or a woman. I'm a scientist. How do I find out?
Your gender identity determines your gender, period.
Okay. So should someone who looks like me, I look like a man, you think I was a man, I say I'm a woman, and I demand to play in a women's sports team, I demand to go to women's college, I demand a small business administration loan for women-owned businesses. That's a real thing. That's a billion-dollar question, for real. Can you turn me down if I say I'm a woman?
The question that is on the table right now is about Title IX.
Let's not
and about guidance. No, but you want to go off on
Title IX applies. It's not a tangent. Title IX applies and was created around the question of women's sports. So, as a apparent man, if I say I'm a woman, is that enough? Do I meet the standard as a woman to play in a women's sports team? That goes right to Title IX. Don't dodge the question.
I'm not dodging the question. This is something the Supreme Court is looking at next month. And yes, the answer is absolutely yes.
Okay.
Gender identity determines one's gender.
Let me ask you
period. This is a matter of civil rights.
Is there science behind this? Because I know that I'm often getting
science.
Really, I want you to name a single scientist, just one, who says you can determine your own sex just by saying so. Can you name one scientist who says that?
I'd be happy to send you many after.
A scientist who said you can determine your own sex. An actual scientist, like someone who went to college.
Listen,
are you serious?
You clearly have some issues around this.
It's not an issue at all. I have questions that you can't answer. And you're instead throwing things like you're not in.
Okay, folks. That's a mercy stop right there. I'm going to say this. I don't think Republicans are perfect, okay? There are a lot of Republicans that feel this way. You cannot vote as a Christian for anybody who entertains this notion. You cannot. It is so unbiblical. This is a level of insanity, public insanity, that's just, it's stunning. It's shocking that, and he's on the Democratic National Committee, which, by the way, approved or voted in as their new leader a radical Marxist leftist who used to be the Secretary of Labor. And because he lost by a very slim margin, they let another radical leftist Muslim, Keith Ellison, he will be like the assistant director or something of this. This, I think some people in Republican politics would look at what happened and what they're saying, and it's like, you go, guys, because you make it easier for us, because you're crazy. But the problem is there's so many people that think this way, by millions, and that's I do not see a hope that this changes before the Lord returns. I just don't. I don't see any indication. When the church is going that way, the Archbishop of the Church of England, Welby, came out with some statements about gender, sex, homosexuality. It's everywhere, folks. And I just look, I pray for revival, but I don't see it happening. I just don't. Here's one from a great blog I haven't looked at for a long time. Blog and Mayblog, he calls it. Nodding for the surveillance cameras. Well, what does this have to do with same-sex marriage? Well, here's the deal. Either he or someone went to Airbnb. I've been looking at Airbnb, because we're going to take a trip, and it's a great place to rent homes and condos, and it's a slick website. It's like the Uber of the accommodations industry. And when they went to check out to rent, this popped up. Before you continue, whether it's your first time using Airbnb or you're one of our original travelers, please to commit to respecting and including everyone in the Airbnb community. I agree to treat everyone in the Airbnb community, regardless of their race, religion, national origin, ethnicity, disability, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, or age, with respect and without judgment or bias. Accept or decline. He hit decline, and what happened? Airbnb wiped out his account and all of his reservations, 6 or 7 of them that he had paid for in advance. The fascists are rampant in the commercial world, in the corporate world. They're going to enforce this stuff. What happens when I go to one of the large banks in town and they say, before we cash your check, would you agree to this? And if you don't, we don't give you money out of your account. Do you think that that's coming? I mean, seriously. Think about it. Think it through. They'll do it in Romans chapter 1. Because that, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like the corruptible man, into birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. And then in verse 32 or 26, for this cause God gave them up to vile affections, for even their women to change the natural use into that which is against nature. I don't even think the Apostle Paul, living in pagan Rome and writing to a church in pagan, vile, unchristian, there was no Christianity right back in those days, at least in the early days of the church, because there was no Christianity. It was a new religion. It was a new thing. I don't even think Paul could look down the corridors of time and see the day that we live in. It's so far beyond that. Verse 32, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. Here's another one. Sex and science, gene editing, clones, and the ethics of making babies. And this came out 2 weeks ago, about 12 days ago, a report, and said gene editing, clones, and the science of making babies, ways of reproducing without sexual intercourse, are multiplying. History suggests that they should be embraced. So now they've co-opted history. This is from The Economist. But it was in the Wall Street Journal as well. But the Wall Street Journal did say, door opens to gene editing in embryos. There's a thing called CRISPR, which allows you to edit DNA. Look at what The Economist says. It used to be so simple. Girl met boy. Gametes were transferred through plumbing optimized by millions of years of evolution. Then 9 months later, part of that plumbing presented the finished product to the world. Now things are becoming a lot more complicated. A report published on February 14th by the America's National Academy of Sciences gives qualified support to research into gene editing techniques so precise that genetic diseases like hemophilia and sickle cell anemia can be fixed before an embryo even starts to develop. Some are horrified at the prospect of people playing God with reproduction. Others, whose lives are blighted by childlessness or genetic disease, argue passionately for the right to alleviate suffering. Either way, the science is coming and society will have to work it out for what it thinks. And so you're at the place where you have to accept this. Because you're feeling, you should feel, listen, I understand a little bit about that. We were never able to have children. Okay? I understand the miracle of science. Okay? But there's a God factor involved in this that we need to be very sensitive to and careful about, because I think this goes back to the Tower of Babel type stuff. God said, look at what they're doing down there. I'm paraphrasing. Nothing will be impossible for them. They're going to do whatever they want. God intervened, and he's about to intervene again. And what he sent in Genesis chapter 11 was, what did he do? He confused their language. And Babel really became known as the city of confusion. Now I want to ask you, does it sound like to you, just listening to things week by week, paying attention, does it sound like we live in the city of confusion right now? Right. It's distressing. It's oppressive. I'm distressed when I see it. Some days I just want to, kind of keep my head down and not run into any of this stuff. So let's go to Dubai. Beautiful city, tallest building in the world. Oil wealth has just built this up. They had the World Government Summit there. I'm going to play a few clips from this. I don't remember which order I have them in. So here's the first clip. Just listen to some of the things they're talking about, where we know that there is a push for a world government, right? And it's coming. And so when they have a big conference where all these people come, like Elon Musk, who you saw earlier, called the World Government Summit, I would think that, well, maybe we ought to pay attention to what they're saying. So here's clip one.
Technology that is now accelerating exponentially. And exponential growth is different than linear growth, right? Linear growth is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exponential growth is a doubling. 2 becomes 4, becomes 8, becomes 16. The classic example, heard it mentioned earlier, is Moore's Law. 1965, Gordon Moore, before he founded Intel, noticed that the number of integrated circuits on a computer chip had been doubling every 18 months. He said, wow, this is amazing. I bet it lasts 5 more years, maybe 10 more years, 20 more years, 30 more years, 40 more. We're going on 60 more years. Moore's Law is the reason that the smartphone in your pocket is 1,000 times cheaper, 1,000,000 times smaller, and 1,000,000 times faster than a supercomputer from the 1970s. The really important point is it's not stopping. 9 years from today, the average $1,000 laptop is going to have the same computing power as the human brain. 25 years after that, the average $1,000 laptop is going to have the same computing power as every human brain currently on the planet.
And by the way, that $1,000 laptop, Apple will sell it for $2,500, I guarantee you. That is a prophetic pronouncement by me. And I know that because I love Apple, okay? Here is a statement on uncertainty. This is kind of interesting.
The rise of uncertainty, we see it in the U.S., we see it in Brexit, we see it around the world. Uncertainty is not going away. I wanted to look at one data point that, to me, more than anything else, defines how quickly we are accelerating. Stephen will talk more about this. But this acceleration began in 1960 with the advent of computing. So back in 1960, we had mainframes, a few of them. And then we went to departmental computers. And then we went to laptops, PCs, laptops, mobile devices, the cloud. Here's what's amazing. And you don't hear this very often. You don't hear this, so please pay attention. In every decade since 1960, the number of user computing devices has increased by 1 order of magnitude. It is almost like Moore's Law. It is an immutable. Every decade, 1 order of magnitude. So what you see here is a logarithmic scale. It looks very flat. It looks very simple. If we were to draw this in a linear scale, this will go up through the clouds into the stratosphere. Every decade, 1 order of magnitude. So the math is simple, right? So if we do the math to 2100, how many user computing devices will there be? 100 times as many user computing devices as there are grains of sand on all of the world's beaches. Now, I'm being conservative. I'm not including the deserts, just the beaches. Okay. How is that possible? It's absurd, you're saying. That couldn't happen. So please, allow me to take you back to 1960. If in 1960 I said to you today we would have 10 billion user computing devices, and of those 10 billion, 2 billion would be these, 7 billion would be cell phones at large, what would you have thought of me in 1960? You would have thought absurd. Can't be. It's impossible. Where would we find the resources? How would we use them? What are the economics behind this? How would we create the cooling systems to cool all these computers? You'd be thinking in terms of the past, not in terms of the present. And from where we stand today, it's so difficult to think in terms of the future. You will be digesting these computing devices. You will be inhaling them. They will be in everything and everyone. They will be pervasive. What does that hyper-connected world look like? I talked about demographic inversion.
Okay. I'm probably going to save this for next Sunday because we talk a lot about demographics, and there was a great foreign policy magazine that just came out. The current issue is about demographics and where things are going. And at the end of his, near the end of his talk, let's see if I can find it. He talks about uncertainty. Hang on, here we go.
Yes. Uncertainty is also increasing. We know this, we experience this, we feel it in our bones. As uncertainty increases, however, so does opportunity. Opportunity increases with uncertainty. It's just that the window of opportunity, what you see on this scale, the window of opportunity is smaller and smaller and smaller. So as uncertainty increases, opportunity increases, but you have to act faster and faster. But what's happening to government at the same time? It's becoming more and more bloated, more siloed, more procedural. That is not a sustainable situation. It simply isn't.
So what he's saying is that uncertainty, what happens with uncertainty is that it comes at you so fast you have to react really, really quickly. It's sort of like the difference between driving a Model T down a superhighway and driving a Formula One race car or a NASCAR car down the freeway at 220 miles an hour. Things come at you pretty quick when you get up that fast. And that creates a lot of uncertainty and disruption with people. And this is the world we live in right now. I mean, Donald Trump's made a few changes to things, not that many, and I mean, oh my gosh, everything is so uncertain. Oh my goodness, what are we going to do? The world's coming to an end, and they're right, it is, but not for the reasons that they think. But this is all plays into prophecy, and I've talked a lot about acceleration. Here's someone, she's from the UN, I can't remember her name, and she gave a speech. Listen to a couple of the words that she uses, though, throughout her speech.
On development and on governing the global comments, I'm rather optimistic, particularly following the phenomenal agenda-setting year of 2015, which saw the finalization of the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030.
Okay, so she looks at the world, and I'm optimistic because the UN's in control of the agenda. Here she goes.
So vital as the world's population urbanizes so fast. And also, interestingly, the development with the UN Summit on Refugees and Migrants, where clearly comprehensive responses are needed to the worst forcible displacement crisis we've ever seen, worse than that at the end of the Second World War. So then let me come to the other big pillar, the peace and security pillar of the UN. When I came...
Okay, she's talking about what? Peace and security, which comes right out of 1 Thessalonians 5, for when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. They're even using the language. It's a okay. Bret Stephens, who I have some major problems with these days, wrote a pretty good article, Do We Still Want the West? He looked at a speech by Sergei Lavrov, the Russian minister, and he said, this is what Lavrov said at the Munich Security Conference. Responsible leaders should make a choice. I hope that the choice will be one in favor of creating a democratic and just world order. If you want, you can call it a post-West world order, when each country, based on its sovereignty within the rules of international law, will strive to find a balance between its own national interests and the national interests of partners. And that's pretty rich coming from Russia. But this is, they called it the post-truth, post-West, post-order. I mentioned this last week thing, and they had a bunch of speeches. I'll play some of them in the future. I think I played John McCain's from last week. Stevens says this: Mr. Lavrov understands something that ought to be increasingly clear to American and European audiences. The West is a geopolitical bloc, a cultural expression, a moral ideal is in deep trouble. Russians continue to think from a deep well of civilizational self-belief. The same can be said about Chinese, and perhaps even of the Islamic world too, troubled as it is. The West, not so much. 25 years ago, becoming a part of the West was the dream from Budapest to Ulaanbaatar. Not anymore. Russia took itself off the westernization track shortly after the turn of the century. Turkey followed a few years later. One can point to many reasons, specific and general, why the West no longer attracts imitators. Let's point to the main reason. There was a time when the West knew what it was about. And he goes on to say, as we've educated this out of people. Now, I'm going to run through some things. We're going to go about 7 more minutes, since we got a little bit of a late start. Here is Steve Bannon speaking at CPAC the other day.
The reason Reince and I are good partners is that we can disagree. It's not only not going to get better, it's going to get worse every day in the media. And here's why. But by the way, the internal logic makes sense. They're corporatist, globalist media that are adamantly opposed to an economic nationalist agenda like Donald Trump has.
So he used the term globalist, world order, agenda, that type of thing. So what did, in a column in the Chicago Tribune on Friday, Jewish group again cites anti-Semitism from Trump administration. And it says something like this: the president finally spoke about the issue Tuesday. In other words, there were attacks, threats, bomb threats, and that type of thing on Jewish community centers. There have been some anti-Semitic attacks. There was a vandalization in a Jewish cemetery in St. Louis. And what was the criticism of President Trump? Well, he didn't come out and speak against it soon enough or strongly enough. And the left is going crazy. All of a sudden, they're all against anti-Semitism. After 8 years of you-know-who being the you-know-what, and the leading you-know-what, anti-you-know-what in the world, in my view. Now, all of a sudden, it's a big problem. Now, all of a sudden, Russia is a big problem. I mean, when I start to stutter, just say, John's trying to say it's insane and be nice about it. So listen to this guy. This is Steve Goldstein, head of the Anne Frank Society, on CNN the other night. Listen to this.
After Trump's remarks today, you came out very forcefully. You wrote, the president's sudden acknowledgement is a Band-Aid on the cancer of anti-Semitism that has infected his own administration. His statement today is a pathetic asterisk of condescension. Make no mistake, the anti-Semitism coming out of this administration is the worst we have ever seen. That is a serious charge.
Absolutely. Erin, time and again, this president has had an opportunity to condemn anti-Semitism. He had a chance to include Jews and Holocaust remembrers. He didn't. He had a chance to speak out against the desecration of Jewish cemeteries this weekend. He didn't. He had a chance to speak out against bomb threats against JCCs, and he didn't. Today, when he was forced, obviously by some staffers, because it came several news cycles after, he finally spoke out. Is our country so lower in its expectations of what to expect from a president that we are supposed to say, congratulations, Mr. President?
Okay, listen, I can't. You have to go and look at. I cannot. I've watched it twice. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm even protecting myself from what I would talk about this week. That's how bad it is. This dweeb has never stood up against what goes on with Palestinians against Jews. He's never uttered a word about that. He needs to be quiet about anti-Semitism. And look it up on CNN. Really, I could go like 5 hours this week. I'm going to have to do one in the middle of the week this week because I've got a couple important things and I just can't get to. Just a couple of highlights though. We love you back. I think I need to show him in shadow from now on. So, we love you back. And it should say, we're back. And this is the thing, the organizing for action that I talked to you about. Look at what he's going to do. This is from Politico, hardly a right-wing news source. Obama lawyers form worst-case scenario group to tackle Trump. So what they've done is top lawyers who helped the Obama White House craft and hold to rules of conduct. This is not The Onion, okay? This is Politico. The Onion is satire. You might think this is The Onion when you first read it. Help the Obama White House craft and hold to rules of conduct. Believe President Trump and his staff will break ethics norms meant to guard against politicization of the government. I mean, it's not The Onion, okay? I'm not making it up. And they've formed a new group to prepare and fight. United to Protect Democracy withdraws its name from a line in Barack Obama's farewell address that urges supporters to pick up where he was leaving off, has already raised $1.5 million operating budget, hired 5 staffers, and has plans to double that in the coming months. From one of Ian Basson, who's leading the new group, said this: when people hear concerns about democracies declining into authoritarianism, they expect that moment to come in singular thunderclap where everyone can see that this is the time. In reality, oftentimes democracies decline over a period of years. That happened through a series of much smaller steps. They started by submitting 50 Freedom of Information Act requests this week that they believe will confirm their suspicions. The plan is to bring what they find to reporters, build it into pressure for congressional oversight with the help of a campaign director they'll hire, as necessary, to file lawsuits. My understanding is there's only been like 42 environmental lawsuits filed against the Trump administration. So you can read about them at United to Protect Democracy. One more thing, 2 more minutes. This immigration thing in sanctuary cities. I saw an interview with the governor of Connecticut. The governor of Connecticut said, we are a sanctuary state. We are not going to cooperate with ICE in rounding up, or when we release somebody from custody, we're not going to tell ICE. And a lot of times what they're doing, like in San Francisco, they'll tell the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, hey, we have a guy here. We know you have a warrant for his arrest. We're releasing him in 30 minutes. If you want him, come pick him up. Now, interestingly enough, one guy released from jail that probably should have been turned over to ICE, and the immigration people went out yesterday in Connecticut and murdered someone. The blood is on the Connecticut governor's head, and he should be held to account for it. And all the social justice warriors that want to do this and engage in this and be scofflaws, all of the problems are on your heads. By the way, these churches that stand up for immigration a lot, you know they get money to bring in immigrants, and they get to keep about half of it. So let's investigate that. Why don't you produce your financial statements, all you people who signed that thing in the Washington Post a couple weeks ago. I won't hold my breath. And then you're going to see this. This is a leak from Homeland Security. Every time Trump comes out with something, there's a leak. And this is going to happen over and over and over again. There's people in the government that work for the government that don't like Trump, and they're going to fight it on every level. Sweden. Trump said something about Sweden, and what was the response immediately? Oh, there's nothing happened in Sweden. Sweden's just fine. It's a socialist workers' paradise, President Trump. And then what happened? Oops, riots in one of the cities I think in Malmo or Stockholm, one of the neighborhoods, it's immigrant neighborhood. They're burning cars. They're fighting. And you need to watch. I'll talk more about it next week. When they cite the statistics about crime in Sweden, or when they cite things about the countries that Trump wants to do the travel ban on, they always say, well, nobody's been killed by these people. That's not the test. You don't care about girls getting raped? Obviously they don't. They don't care whether girls can see you-know-what in a male locker room and in their own locker room. I'm rarely without words, but today I'm close. But every now and then the truth comes out. So what did they do? 3 days they're all over Trump for tweeting this about Sweden, right? The Sweden prime minister, the Sweden foreign minister, people in our government. Oh, what Trump doesn't know what he's talking about. Sweden's just fine. And then all of a sudden, this appears in the New York Times. I think it was yesterday. Headline: Sweden, nation of open arms, rethinks immigration. So here's another rule of thumb. When the left complains, wait a couple days and you'll find the truth. Don't get caught up in the hype, because they just want to control the news cycle. Well, I have way more to do, and we have to go because we have a business meeting. And I will try to put something out this week. There's some incredible things going on. I didn't even get to the Middle East this week. But all of this converges together. And there's a great article over at the Institute for Study of War, understandingwar.org, called The Strategic Convergence of Russia and Iran. This plays right in to Ezekiel 38, and I'll try to put up a little thing or talk about it next Sunday. It's stunning. I mean, it's just absolutely stunning. And these are secular organizations that are coming out with the facts to support the prophetic scenarios. That's what's so exciting about it. And so I'm fairly upbeat about it. I mean, it was 79 in Columbus, Ohio on February 24th. What can you not be upbeat about? But look, it's a distressing time. You need to understand that. But we're not the ones without hope. It's this world that's in this crazy mix, and this is not our home long term. But it's tough while we're here, okay? But we need to keep looking up, okay? Let's pray. Father, thanks for this day. Thanks for a great congregation that will sit and listen to this. And Lord, I just pray that you would raise up more men to talk about Bible prophecy and the events of these times, to assure their congregation of the great hope that we have that Jesus is going to come back and set up a kingdom and make everything right again. Lord, we pray that you would hasten that day when we see the kingdom in its full fruition. Bless us as we go this week. In Jesus' name, amen.